She came at my wife swinging a rake like it was a medieval joust. The only problem was she picked the wrong opponent. My wife ducked, caught the handle mid-swing with one hand, and calmly said the words that silenced the entire block. "You ever tried that again, and I'll teach you how gravity works." Karen blinked twice, stumbled backward into her own flowerbed, and sat there stunned like a cartoon villain who just slipped on her own banana peel. 20 minutes earlier, all of this had started over 3 inches of grass. Our neighborhood wasn't supposed to be the kind of place where things turned theatrical. It was suburban, tidy, HOA-controlled, and as bland as oatmeal. You had the occasional barking dog dispute or late-night lawnmower grumble, but nothing that would merit going viral. That all changed when Karen moved in 3 houses down. She arrived with designer sunglasses, a clipboard she called her HOA assistant, and a loud belief that every rule was made for her to weaponize. She was the kind of person who printed out bylaws before introducing herself, and she had a weird obsession with everyone's lawn boundaries. Unfortunately for us, ours was the first one she decided to wage war against. It started innocently enough, or at least it looked that way. One morning, I stepped outside to see Karen crouched near the edge of our lawn, measuring tape in hand and a deep scowl on her face. My wife, Lana, was watering our flower bed, completely ignoring her. I could already tell by the set of Lana's shoulders that she was choosing peace, but barely. Karen looked up, squinted at the grass, and then stomped toward us with the same confidence as someone who thought she was auditioning for Judge Judy. "Did you know your grass is creeping exactly 4 inches past the property line?" she asked, arms crossed and chin tilted like a hawk spotting prey. Lana didn't miss a beat. "Must be the wind." "Wind doesn't grow grass," Karen snapped. "Neither does nagging," Lana replied, without even looking away from the flowers. That moment was the first time I saw Karen's eye twitch. It wouldn't be the last. Karen stormed off that day, but the next morning, we found a laminated note zip-tied to our mailbox. Official notice from HOA subcommittee, it read, in Comic Sans of all fonts. Violation, lawn overreach. Penalty, $75 fine. We both laughed at the absurdity until we realized she had actually walked door to door gathering signatures to create an impromptu lawn subcommittee and appointed herself president. Nobody had even voted. She just declared it. We ignored the fine, assuming common sense would eventually take root. It didn't. 2 days later, our sprinkler timer mysteriously stopped working. When I checked the system box, the wires had been snipped, clean, deliberate. A neighbor's kid swore he saw the sunglasses lady poking around late at night, but of course, Karen denied everything. Things escalated from passive-aggressive to almost comedic when she started drawing her own boundary lines in chalk across our shared curb. One night, we came home to find little plastic flags stabbing into the grass every few inches with notes like "This blade of grass is trespassing and you're on notice." It would have been funny if it wasn't so psychotic. But the tipping point came on a Saturday afternoon during our neighborhood's annual block cookout. We'd hosted for years, grilling burgers while the kids played in inflatable bounce houses and the adults mingled with lemonade and lawn chairs. Lana, being the friendly neighborhood badass she is, was setting up folding tables with our daughter when Karen came marching up like a mall cop on a mission. She had a tape measure in one hand and a loudspeaker in the other. "You are violating HOA cookout perimeter regulations by encroaching beyond your lot line," she blared like she was commanding an army. Lana calmly folded a chair and asked, "You gonna fine us for putting a grill on the grass too?" Karen's lip curled. She looked around at the growing crowd of neighbors, probably expecting applause. What she got was awkward silence. Then, without warning, she stepped forward and shoved one of the folding tables, causing a bowl of pasta salad to tumble. Lana turned. Karen, for reasons only her ego understood, then raised a rake that had been leaning against the tree nearby and swung it in a wide arc. That was the moment. That was the split second where fantasy clashed with reality. Lana stepped to the side, caught the rake with one hand, and twisted it from Karen's grip without even wrinkling her shirt. Then she gently placed her hand on Karen's wrist and guided her downward with the practiced calm of someone who had done this before. Karen landed softly, more surprised than hurt, and sat on the grass in stunned disbelief as the entire block froze. You see, what Karen didn't know was that Lana wasn't just a laid-back suburban wife who grew vegetables and hosted bake sales. She was also a former MMA champion with a record that made grown men nervous. Before we had kids, Lana was known in the cage as the Valkyrie. She had trained at top-tier gyms, held regional titles, and had even appeared in one of the early UFC undercards before retiring to start our family. She had chosen peace. But that didn't mean she'd forgotten how to handle herself. Karen scrambled to her feet, muttering something about assault, but nobody was buying it. Half the neighborhood had it on video. A few even replayed the moment on their phones, slow-mo style. My favorite was Mr. Delaney across the street who muttered, "Damn, that was cleaner than cable TV." Karen stormed off, humiliated but clearly not defeated. You could see it in her eyes. The gears were turning. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. That night, as we sipped iced tea and watched the sun dip below the rooftops, Lana turned to me with a smirk. "Think she'll come back tomorrow with what? A jousting lance," I joked. But inside, we both knew Karen had just been publicly embarrassed in front of every person she considered beneath her. She wasn't going to take that lying down. And we were right. Because by morning, there were new laminated signs posted around the neighborhood. A formal petition to ban physical intimidation and prohibit any resident with professional fighting experience from participating in community events unless chaperoned by a board-approved monitor. In other words, the HOA had just declared war on my wife. And my wife was ready. The morning after the cookout incident, we thought maybe the embarrassment would have been enough for Karen to back off. But people like her don't quit when they're wrong. They double down, twist the truth, and try to turn the entire world into a courtroom where only they get to be judge and jury. Sure enough, we woke up to a flurry of texts from neighbors, screenshots flying left and right. Karen had launched what she was calling a community safety initiative and posted on the HOA group chat about how a violent confrontation involving a trained professional fighter had taken place at a family event, and how she feared for the children's safety. She didn't name Lana outright, but she didn't have to. Everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. It wasn't just gossip. By noon, Karen had delivered printed flyers to every doorstep on our block. The bold headline read, "Protect our kids, say no to violence." Underneath was a dramatic retelling of the rake incident, except in Karen's version, she had bravely tried to stop a territorial invasion and been slammed to the ground by a hostile neighbor trained in mixed martial arts. She called herself a concerned civilian. Lana was labeled a combatant. She even made up a quote she claimed to overhear from Lana. "I don't start fights, I finish them." The whole thing would have been laughable if it hadn't been paired with real consequences. Within a day, Karen managed to rope 3 other board members into calling an emergency HOA session to discuss community security. It wasn't hard to guess what that meant. Lana and I arrived early, mostly to get seats before the wave of curiosity seekers rolled in. The HOA clubhouse, usually empty except for bingo nights and potlucks, was packed wall to wall. Phones were out. A few people were whispering. Karen stood at the front, not dressed in her usual pastel blazers, but in what looked like a dramatic black shawl and sunglasses, like she thought this was some kind of courtroom drama. The meeting was chaos from the start. Karen opened by dramatically reading her version of events. When she got to the part about suffering minor spinal trauma, I nearly choked on my coffee. Lana remained calm, arms folded, expression unreadable. Karen tried to introduce a motion to restrict known professional fighters from using communal spaces unsupervised. The crowd began to murmur. One neighbor raised his hand and asked, "So what, are we banning people for having a black belt now?" Another said, "Karen, weren't you the one who picked up a rake first?" Karen snapped that she was defending herself. She pointed at Lana and shouted, She's a weapon. She could have killed me. That was when Lana finally stood up, walked to the front, and addressed the room in the calmest, most polite voice imaginable. She simply said, "I'm a former professional athlete. I've fought on TV in controlled settings. I've never once laid a hand on anyone outside that environment. What happened at the cookout was me de-escalating a situation without harm." Then she turned and looked directly at Karen. "You came at me. Remember that?" Someone in the back whispered, "Yeah, and she folded you like laundry." The room erupted into nervous laughter. Karen's face turned a shade of red that bordered on purple. She tried to maintain control of the meeting, but it had slipped. Still, the damage was done. Even if the board didn't vote to ban Lana, Karen's version of the story had started to spread online. A Facebook group titled HOA Harmony had popped up, supposedly to preserve peace in the neighborhood, but it was just Karen under a different name, posting manipulated screenshots and fishing for sympathy. The next day, things got weirder. Someone anonymously submitted a request to local media about a violent altercation in Suburban Park involving a professional fighter. A blog picked it up, and a reporter even showed up on our block looking for interviews. Karen, of course, gave a tearful statement on camera, posing beside her garden while describing the ambush in poetic detail. Lana declined to speak. She just laughed and told me, "If she wants to dig a hole, let her keep the shovel." Meanwhile, Karen doubled down again. She started showing up to the HOA gym wearing boxing gloves and sweatbands, shadowboxing like she was training for the next Rocky sequel. She made a big scene of getting ready for her next encounter. It might have been funny, but then she dragged a worn-out guy named Daryl into the mix. He was allegedly her coach, a guy with a receding hairline, mirrored sunglasses, and a permanent energy drink in hand. He claimed to have fought in unofficial circuits, and once tried to demonstrate a spin kick that nearly took out a trash can. Daryl began posting on Nextdoor, taunting Lana. He wrote things like, "My girl Karen don't back down," and "Real fighters fight in the street." At first we ignored it, but then they distributed laminated posters advertising a community self-defense event to be hosted on the Green Belt, right along the disputed lawn space. They even brought cones and a portable speaker. When neighbors showed up expecting safety tips, they were greeted with Karen wearing a mouthguard and attempting to punch mitts Daryl could barely hold steady. The crowd mostly watched in confusion. But one clip of Karen yelling, "Float like a butterfly, sting like HOA," went viral on TikTok. Overnight, our quiet neighborhood became internet famous. Comment sections were flooded with people asking if Lawn Fight Lady had really challenged a UFC fighter. Someone found Lana's old fight videos online and clipped them next to Karen's disastrous shadowboxing. It spread fast. Memes followed. Lana's calm stare became a trending gif. The internet picked sides, and they weren't siding with Karen. But while the internet was laughing, Karen was preparing. Or at least pretending to. She began talking loudly at every community event about settling things the old-fashioned way. She framed it like a showdown was inevitable, that Lana would eventually have to face her. Even though no one wanted that. Not Lana, not me, not the neighbors. Karen was turning it into a spectacle. She was obsessed with the idea of redeeming herself, as if being mildly embarrassed by your own stupidity was some sort of ancient dishonor that had to be avenged through gladiatorial combat. By the end of the week, the HOA president, Mr. Gilroy, had reached a breaking point. He called us privately and asked if we'd be willing to file a restraining order to stop Karen from dragging the neighborhood into a backyard brawl. But Lana just smiled and said, "I'd rather let her wear herself out." Karen might have had rage, but Lana had control, and that control was driving Karen crazy. Then came the surprise that no one saw coming. An anonymous email was sent to the HOA mailing list, revealing Karen's expulsion from 3 prior HOAs in different towns. Included were scanned documents, board statements, and even a photo of Karen yelling at a man dressed as Santa Claus. The email was simply signed, "A concerned former neighbor." That's when everything started to shift. The community began realizing this wasn't about a lawn, or even a petty fight. Karen had a history, a pattern, and for the first time, the weight of her own behavior began collapsing in on her. But it wasn't over yet, because even after all this, Karen had one more plan. A dramatic finale in her mind. A way to reclaim her pride. She was going to challenge Lana, publicly. On the lawn. At the next HOA weekend picnic. And she was going to. The week leading up to the HOA weekend picnic felt like living in the trailer for a bad reality show. The tension was so thick that even the mailman started dropping our letters off from the sidewalk. Karen had gone from obsessed to fully unhinged. She wasn't just hinting at a confrontation anymore, she was openly declaring it. Every neighbor, every dog walker, every Amazon delivery driver heard her rehearsing speeches or shouting to herself in the mirror window facing the lawn. You'd think she was training for a TED Talk on suburban warfare. Meanwhile, Lana remained unfazed. While Karen was pacing and barking commands at Daryl like he was her coach, and she was preparing for the Olympics, Lana kept going about her day like the upcoming showdown was just another stop between grocery shopping and folding laundry. Despite Lana's indifference, the neighborhood couldn't stop talking about it. What started as a ridiculous lawn dispute had become a full-fledged suburban legend. Kids were reenacting the rake incident with pool noodles. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years were suddenly bonding over popcorn and folding chairs. Even local businesses caught wind. One bakery put up a sign saying Team Lana cookies, half off. A local yoga studio offered a special class-themed inner peace in the face of Karen's. Lana found it all amusing. I, on the other hand, was exhausted. It wasn't the drama, it was the sheer disbelief that this was our life now. By Wednesday, HLA President Mr. Gilroy called an emergency meeting, not to stop the confrontation, but to issue legal disclaimers. He stood behind the clubhouse podium with bags under his eyes, reading from a document titled Liability Waiver Regarding Personal Altercations on Community Property. It was like watching a principal read rules before a food fight. He begged everyone to remain civil and reminded us that the HOA could not afford another lawsuit. He didn't mention names, but the glare he gave Karen said it all. She simply nodded smugly and asked if there would be microphones and press coverage. That nearly made Gilroy choke. The day before the picnic, Karen unveiled her fight uniform. I wish I was making this up. She strutted down the sidewalk in a neon pink tracksuit, bedazzled on the back with the words HOA Avenger, and on the front, Karen vs. Cage Queen. Her sunglasses had rhinestones. Her mouthguard was custom-made with fake gold plating. And to top it off, she had Daryl carry a speaker blasting Eye of the Tiger while she shadowboxed in front of the clubhouse. The HOA Gardening Committee canceled their meeting just to avoid the circus. Daryl, ever the hype man, kept yelling phrases like, "We don't run from rakes," and "Suburbia's ours now," to absolutely no one in particular. Across the street, Lana watched through the blinds, sipping coffee, wearing a hoodie and gym shorts. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than any of Karen's theatrics. It was grace in the face of madness. That night, while we were cleaning up dinner, Lana casually said, "You think I should wear gloves or just use open palms?" I didn't know if she was joking or serious, but judging by her smirk, she was enjoying the absurdity of it all more than I was. Saturday arrived like a finale none of us had asked for. The sun was out, the barbecue smell filled the air, and neighbors gathered on lawn chairs and picnic blankets like they were attending a music festival. Someone even set up a popcorn stand. There were kids with handmade signs that said things like, "Lana for life," and "Don't poke the fighter." Across the greenbelt, Karen had cordoned off an area with cones and garden stake. She brought out a plastic folding table with bottles of water, towels, and a cheap plastic trophy shaped like a gold eagle. Daryl took the mic first. Apparently, he now considered himself a ring announcer. He stood near the cones, dramatically cleared his throat, and shouted, "Ladies and gentlemen of the subdivision, Today marks the moment where justice meets the lawn. He gestured to Karen, who emerged from her house to thunderous silence. No one clapped. Some people snickered. She did a slow spin, raised her fists like she was walking into a stadium, and marched toward the center of the lawn with full conviction. Lana, meanwhile, was nowhere in sight. People began looking around, whispering. Karen stood awkwardly in her cone ring, fists still raised, clearly expecting Lana to come marching out for a duel. Daryl stalled with more over-the-top narration, throwing in random phrases like former queen of combat and legend of landscaping law. But the more time passed, the more confused Karen got. Finally, the crowd parted and Lana appeared, not in gym gear, not in anything combat-ready, but in yoga pants, a tank top, and flip-flops. She walked out holding a smoothie. Karen pointed and yelled, "So you're finally here." Lana took a long sip from her smoothie and replied, "I live here. You're the one with the entrance music." The crowd chuckled. Karen gritted her teeth. "This ends now," she barked, stepping forward with fists raised again. Lana looked around. "You want to fight me? On this grass? In front of all these kids? For what? A trophy you got off Amazon?" Karen, red-faced and desperate, lunged. And that was the moment Lana finally moved. It wasn't even violent. Lana didn't throw a punch. She stepped to the side, lightly tapped Karen's hip with her foot, and redirected her into one of the garden cones. Karen tripped, flailed like a cartoon character, and face-planted directly into the patch of lawn she had tried so hard to control. Daryl let out an audible oof. Gasps, laughter, and camera clicks filled the air. Lana looked down, still sipping her smoothie, and said, "That was your final round." Karen tried to scramble up, covered in grass, but the moment was over. Her pride had fallen harder than she did. Lana turned to the crowd, shrugged, and walked back toward our house as people broke into applause. No fists, no violence, just Karen, lying flat in the very space she had fought to dominate. Daryl tried to help her up, but she slapped his hand away. "This isn't over," she shouted. But everyone knew it was. Back inside, Lana sat on the couch, still calm as ever. She checked her phone, saw the flood of texts and TikTok mentions, and just shook her head. "I didn't even break a sweat," she said. I looked outside. Karen was storming back to her house, knocking over her own trophy in the process. Daryl quietly grabbed the cones and slipped away like a retreating backup dancer. But the real kicker came a few hours later when we checked the HOA group chat. A new poll had gone up. Should Karen be removed from the HOA board due to erratic behavior and misuse of authority? Within minutes, it was 92% yes. Lana stretched, leaned back, and smiled. Well, that was one way to mow the lawn. By Sunday morning, the entire neighborhood was still buzzing from what had quickly become known as the lawn fall. It was surreal to walk outside and hear people quoting Lana's one-liners or replaying videos of Karen faceplanting in slow motion like it was a scene from a blockbuster movie. Neighbors waved as we passed, giving Lana respectful nods and clapping like she just won a trophy rather than defended her dignity with a smoothie in hand and zero effort. It should have been the end of it, a graceful, hilarious conclusion to a ridiculous neighborhood saga. But Karen, unsurprisingly, wasn't finished yet. She had retreated into her house immediately after the fall, curtains drawn tight like she was in mourning. Daryl vanished too. Rumor had it he left town and blocked half the neighborhood on social media. But Karen? Karen did what Karen always did. She found a new way to make herself the victim. That afternoon, a mass email hit every inbox in the HOA community mailing list. The subject line read, "A message from a wounded neighbor." Attached was a 2-page PDF that read like a courtroom closing statement, complete with exaggerated vocabulary and dramatic font choices. In it, Karen claimed she had suffered emotional trauma, humiliation, and permanent damage to her public standing. She compared Lana's presence to a hostile threat to community morale, and then she made her boldest demand yet. She requested a restraining order from the HOA. Yes, not from the court, but from the actual HOA board. She wanted them to declare Lana a security risk and restrict her access to common areas. The most ridiculous part? She cited martial arts intimidation as a reason, accusing Lana of weaponizing her silence. It was the kind of email that would have been laughed off, but Karen had filed it through the proper HOA channels, which meant the board had to meet and officially review it. It was absurd. It was laughable. But by Tuesday evening, we found ourselves sitting in folding chairs again, facing the HOA board while Karen arrived in a neck brace and ankle wrap like she'd been through a wrestling match and not a stumble over a garden cone. Lana sat quietly, arms crossed, lips pressed together to keep from laughing. I could tell she was holding it in with every fiber of her being. Karen's performance was so theatrical, it belonged on a stage. She even brought what she called evidence, which included screenshots of social media posts, blurry photos of Lana near the mailbox, and a printed comment that read "Lana is queen," as if it were a threat. The board listened politely, but even Mr. Gilroy looked like he was struggling not to roll his eyes. When Karen finally stopped talking, the room was so quiet you could hear a mosquito pass out. Lana stood up and gave the shortest speech of the night. I didn't threaten anyone. I didn't hurt anyone. I avoided conflict at every step. This isn't about safety. This is about Karen being embarrassed that she picked a fight she couldn't win. She sat down. That was it. The board deliberated for 15 minutes, came back, and politely denied Karen's request. No restrictions. No action. The only thing they did was recommend a formal mediation session between the parties, which neither of us had any interest in. Karen stormed out, still wearing her neck brace, bumping into a trash bin on her way to the parking lot. We thought that would finally be the moment she gave up. But Karen didn't know how to quit. The very next day, several neighbors found tiny printed signs staked into their yard. One said, "Protect our lawns. No MMA in suburbia." Another read, "Keep parks peaceful. Say no to fighters." She even made stickers. It was so wildly over the top that one guy, rich from down the street, collected all the signs and used them to decorate his Halloween skeleton display. He dressed one up as Karen, complete with a rake and a speech bubble that said, "You're in violation." The community began to turn, and not quietly. More and more people started to speak out, not just against the fight incident but about years of Karen's behavior. Stories surfaced about her yelling at teenagers for skateboarding, reporting gardeners for using the wrong fertilizer, and even trying to issue fines for sidewalk chalk. Lana didn't have to say a word. The neighbors did it for her. They wrote letters, started a new petition, and asked the HOA to review Karen's conduct as a board member. This time, it wasn't just a formality, it was serious. The momentum had shifted. A few days later, a surprise visitor knocked at our door. She was in her late 60s, wore glasses, and introduced herself as Deborah, a former HOA president from a town Karen had lived in 2 years prior. She'd seen the viral video online, recognized Karen instantly, and made the drive out of pure spite. Over coffee on our porch, she told us everything. Karen had pulled the same stunts there. Fake reports, overreach of power, public meltdowns. She tried to fine me for painting my shutters too light, Deborah said with a laugh. And when I told her no, she put dog poop on my welcome mat. With Deborah's statement added to the growing pile of complaints, Mr. Gilroy finally had the leverage he needed. He called a full community vote to decide Karen's fate. For 3 days, ballots were dropped off in envelopes, and neighbors whispered about what would happen if she stayed. The results were read at the end of the week in front of the entire neighborhood. Gilroy cleared his throat and said, "By a vote of 73-5, Karen has been removed from the HOA board effective immediately." The crowd erupted. Someone actually popped confetti. Karen wasn't present. Rumor had it she had already started packing. Lana looked at me and said, "That's probably the only time I've seen democracy work this fast." I laughed. But the final surprise came that night. Around midnight, security cameras picked up footage of Karen trying to dig up her garden flag stakes in the dark. In her rage, she tripped again, this time over a solar light, and fell face-first into the mulch. The footage was grainy, but it ended up on a subreddit titled, "Karen's Getting Instant Karma," and by morning, it had 1 million views. The next week, Karen officially moved out. Her house went up for sale, and a retired librarian couple moved in. They brought cookies to their first HOA meeting and apologized in advance if their yard ever got a little wild because they aren't great with hedge trimmers. The entire room clapped. Lana was ached to join the HOA board but declined. "I'd rather keep my fights inside the gym," she said. Instead, she offered free self-defense classes at the community center every Sunday morning. They were wildly popular. Not because anyone expected more Karens, but because everyone now knew what it looked like when quiet confidence stood up to loud chaos and won. The lawn grew back, unbothered. The flags were gone. The only reminder of Karen's reign was a small spot near the greenbelt where her trophy had once been left behind. Someone later planted flowers there. They bloomed quietly, with no drama, just like it should have always been. It was almost poetic how calm everything became after Karen's departure. For the first time in months, the mornings were filled with nothing but birdsong and the occasional hum of a lawnmower, not ranting, not demands, and certainly not plastic flags accusing grass of trespassing. Our neighborhood returned to what it was meant to be, peaceful, quirky, and mostly free of theatrics. It was as if the entire block exhaled at once. People were friendlier. Kids played in the cul-de-sac again. Even Mr. Gilroy, who had practically aged 10 years during the Karen saga, looked like he'd lost stress weight overnight. But perhaps the strangest part of all was just how normal life felt once she was gone. The silence wasn't empty. It was earned. Lana, of course, didn't skip a beat. She refused to let the drama define her, and in classic Lana fashion, she pivoted from suburban legend to low-key hero with the kind of grace only someone who'd been through a literal cage fight could pull off. Every Sunday morning, she held free self-defense classes on the same lawn where Karen once tried to declare war. Teenagers, mothers, even a few curious dads showed up with yoga mats and water bottles, eager to learn not just how to throw a punch, but how to stand your ground without losing your cool. It wasn't about fighting. It was about confidence, and Lana was the perfect instructor. The first class drew 15 people. By the third week, it had over 40. Local police even stopped by, not to monitor, but to join. Officer Ramirez, who had once issued Karen a warning for trespassing, became a regular and joked that Lana's classes had better attendance than the city gym. Everyone laughed, but it was true. Word had spread, not just from the viral video, but from the way Lana carried herself afterward. She didn't gloat. She didn't post victory selfies. She didn't even reference Karen unless someone brought her up, and even then she'd only shrug and say she needed something to fight. I just wasn't going to be it. But Karen hadn't vanished entirely. One day, about 3 weeks after she moved out, a letter arrived in our mailbox. There was no return address, just a shaky scrawl that we immediately recognized. Inside was a single sheet of paper with the words, "You may have one, but you humiliated me." Below that was a scribbled drawing of what looked like a broken rake and the phrase, "Beware public revenge." It was so unhinged, we weren't sure whether to laugh or file it. We chose to laugh and passed it along to Mr. Gilroy, who forwarded it to the city attorney's office just in case. Apparently, we weren't the only ones she'd sent cryptic notes to. A few other neighbors quietly confirmed they'd received similar farewell letters. None were threatening, just weird. One of them was written entirely in rhyming couplet. Another included a pressed flower with the words, "My last bloom here." It was pure Karen, dramatic, self-centered, and obliviously absurd. Still, we couldn't deny the impact her departure had left. While things were better, some scars lingered. There was an undercurrent of awareness now. The HOA board began reviewing protocols to prevent unilateral action by a single board member. Gilroy pushed through a new rule requiring video evidence before fines could be issued. The entire community became more transparent and accountable. Ironically, Karen had managed to improve the system, but only by being such a disaster that no one wanted a repeat. And then, as if fate decided the drama needed one last encore, the local news station called. A journalist who had seen the viral video and followed the HOA updates reached out asking if Lana would agree to an interview, not to rehash the brawl, but to talk about how she'd handled the situation with restraint and dignity. Lana wasn't thrilled about going on camera again, but after some nudging, she agreed. The segment was called Grace Under Pressure: How One Woman Defused a Neighborhood War. They filmed her class, interviewed neighbors, and even got footage of Lana calmly explaining the difference between confidence and violence. The response was overwhelming. Viewers from across the state sent emails, thanking her for setting an example. One woman from Minnesota mailed a handwritten letter that read, "You taught me that strength isn't always loud." That interview changed everything. Lana was invited to speak at a regional community leadership seminar. From there, a city council member approached her to consult on neighborhood conflict resolution. By the end of the month, she'd been offered a part-time position as a civic outreach coordinator. I teased her, calling her the grass whisperer, but deep down I was proud. What began as a silly lawn feud had opened the door for something far more meaningful. Lana was using what she knew, discipline, awareness, grace, to help others find their voice before shouting turned into war. We still joked about Karen from time to time. Anytime something strange happened in the neighborhood, a mysteriously moved trash can, a weird note on a windshield, someone would mutter, "Karen's ghost strikes again." It became a running gag. At Halloween, someone even dressed as her, neck brace, clipboard, and all. The whole block laughed. And that was the difference. We could laugh again. Our lawn, the original battleground, became a symbol, not of conflict, but of how you can stand your ground without going low. Lana kept it trimmed, neat, but never obsessively perfect. She refused to let that patch of grass become sacred. "It's just lawn," she told a local reporter once. "But it's also where you decide what kind of neighbor you're going to be." Months passed. The viral buzz faded. The flags never returned. The only things staked in our yard were wind chimes and bird feeders. And every now and then, someone walking by would stop to say, "I remember what happened here." Lana would smile and nod, then turn back to watering her garden, never once needing to relive it. The truth is, Karen didn't just lose a petty argument. She lost the audience. Once her drama stopped being entertaining, people moved on. But Lana didn't fight to win a crowd. She simply refused to be baited. That made all the difference. In the end, the lawn space she fought so hard to protect wasn't just physical, it was a metaphor. Karen wanted territory. Lana held boundaries. Karen demanded respect. Lana earned it. And while Karen faded into infamy, Lana quietly built something lasting: trust, community, and a gentle warning that not all power needs to roar. And maybe, just maybe, somewhere out there, Karen is standing in another neighborhood, rake in hand, trying to draw lines again. But this time, I hope she pauses. I hope she remembers how it felt to fall, not from a punch, but from her own pride. Because sometimes, the strongest defense isn't fists. It's knowing who you are, and never needing to prove it.